Early in the morning, there was a loud male scream in the apartment on the outskirts of the city. Mr. Thomas woke himself up with his own cry. He had been suffering from nightmares for 2 years now. Every morning, the same scenario played out for him. He would wake up from another nightmarish dream, wash his face, and go to his daughter's room. Today was no exception. Thomas splashed his face with cold water, brushed his teeth, and went to the children's room. He sat on the floor between two cribs. Claire slept in one, and Ophelia in the other. Thomas rested his head on his knees and cried. Every day, he went through this ritual. A few minutes of sobbing, and only then could he wake up the little ones. Although the girls hadn't been sleeping for a long time. They woke up every morning to their father's screams. The sisters would glance at each other, then cast their sad eyes down. They didn't speak to each other, but each knew what the other was thinking. This family was united by one sorrow. Despite being just little girls, they felt more sorry for their father than for themselves. Every time, they pretended to be asleep when he came into the room so as not to upset him even more. The girls knew he wouldn't want to show his tears and weakness in front of them. "Ophelia, Claire, it's time to open your eyes," the man said gently, rocking one and then the other slightly. The girls opened their eyes, stretched, and then sat in their wheelchairs and went to the bathroom. Thomas held back his tears again, made their cribs, and went to the bathroom to help the little ones wash up. Although over the past 2 years, the girls had learned to manage perfectly well on their own. It was unbearable for him to see these little bodies that should be running around on playgrounds, getting bumps in the yard while playing with friends. Instead, they spent their days sitting in the stuffy apartment. "Dad, why do we have to get up so early?" "Nancy won't come for another 3 hours anyway," Claire complained. "I had such a good dream." "I was running through the forest chasing squirrels," Ophelia added with a tearful voice, supporting her sister. "Nancy will come earlier today." "You need to have breakfast in time," Thomas replied to the girls. "And get used to it. You're first graders now. You'll have to get up early all the time." "The teacher also comes after lunch," Claire protested against her father's words. The girls were twins. It was practically impossible to tell them apart by appearance. But they had different characters. Claire was older than her sister by only 15 minutes. But she never missed an opportunity to remind her of that. She was very persistent and capricious. Her character was much tougher than her sister's. Ophelia, on the other hand, listened to her sister in everything. She always agreed with her, repeated her words and complaints because she wanted to be as brave as her sister. In fact, Ophelia was a sweet and gentle girl, the complete opposite of her sister. Because the girls couldn't walk, Thomas enrolled them in homeschooling. They didn't go to first grade with everyone else. The teacher came to their home. Before the family could finish breakfast, there was a knock on the door. Nancy had arrived. She worked as a nurse and also as a nanny for the girls. Claire made a displeased face. She didn't like this girl because she noticed that their dad liked her. Yes, the girls were only 8 years old, but they had lost their mom just 2 years ago, so they remembered her well. They didn't like that some woman was trying to do her job and trying to replace her completely. Ophelia didn't feel strong hatred towards Nancy, but she echoed her sister in everything, so she also grunted dissatisfiedly and put a glass of milk on the table. "You look really bad today," Nancy worried about her friend and boss. "Today is exactly 2 years," he replied emotionlessly. Nancy silently nodded. She had completely forgotten that on this day, 2 years ago, Mr. Thomas had been widowed, and his daughters had become disabled. While the girls finished their breakfast, Nancy prepared the IVs under which the sisters would have to lie for about 2 hours. Thomas said goodbye to everyone and went to work. He was a surgeon, a very good specialist. He even headed a department at a private clinic, but his working day started an hour later. Mr. Thomas wanted to stop by the cemetery to see his beloved woman once again, to ask for her forgiveness once more, although he knew it wouldn't help anymore. On the way, he mentally returned to the day of the accident. Thomas had an important conference in the capital. All evening he was choosing a suit. He repeated the report several times, checked the documents. But who knew that in the morning, Martha would clean up and move the folder with his passport to another place. Thomas was sure that his wife had put the documents together with the train tickets in his bag. But at the station, he discovered that the passports were missing. The last conversation between the spouses had been very tense. Mr. Thomas was already nervous about the upcoming performance. And now it turns out that he might not even make it to the event. He rudely ordered his wife to drop everything and bring him the documents. "But we're heading to the clinic with the girls." "I told you, we're just leaving the house," Martha, worried, replied to him. "It's a good thing you haven't left yet." "You can grab my passport on your way," Thomas insisted. "Your doctor can wait. If anything, you can wait a bit longer in line. But delaying the train because of me isn't an option." "The next one, I won't make it in time," Martha replied. Martha agreed to help her husband. After all, she was to blame for putting his business trip at risk. The woman quickly grabbed the necessary folder and went to the station with the girls to immediately head to the hospital from there. Every 2 minutes, Thomas messaged, "Are you getting close? Where are you now?" This greatly annoyed Martha. She felt guilty and worried about her beloved. To make sure she would make it in time, she drove, breaking all sorts of traffic rules. She didn't yield to pedestrians and cars where she should have. In the end, she ran a red light. She managed to get away with it a few times, but the last time became fatal. Martha thought there were no cars nearby, so she decided to run the red light again, but a motorcyclist appeared out of nowhere. The guy crashed right into the spot where Martha was sitting. The woman lost control, and the car, rolling across the entire road, flew onto the sidewalk. Both the motorcyclist and Martha died in the accident. By some miracle, the 2 twin girls sitting in the back seat of the car survived the crash. But both suffered spinal injuries. Claire and Ophelia lost the ability to stand on their own. It was the moment of impact that had haunted Thomas for the past 2 years. He didn't make it to any conference that day. The man actually wanted to quit his job altogether and devote himself entirely to his children, to their treatment and rehabilitation. It was Nancy who talked him out of it back then. After all, one needs to live off something. She offered her help herself. Offered to become a nanny for the girls. Her services were needed from the very first day because Thomas couldn't juggle both work, funeral preparations, and the girls' treatment. Besides, he was suffering from depression, burdened by guilt that literally crushed him. Not a day went by without him scolding and cursing himself for ordering his wife to come to him as quickly as possible. Who knew she would want to please him so much that she would break the rules? Another message from Thomas remained unread, and when he called Martha, her phone was turned off. He started to get nervous. There were 20 minutes left until the train departed, and his wife hadn't even arrived yet, let alone turned off her phone. And if he had known that at that moment her lifeless body was being loaded into an ambulance, he wouldn't have uttered the words that had poured out of him like a stream just a couple of moments ago. The train left. Thomas watched almost tearfully as the last car departed. He promised to find Martha right away, wherever she was, and tell her everything he thought about it. But he was in for even worse news than missing such an important event for his career. Thomas's phone rang. The number was unknown, but the man answered. He was told that there had been an accident and the address of the hospital where he could come to identify his wife's body and see the girls. Mr. Thomas hung up the phone and fell to his knees. How unbearably painful it was for him at that moment. All the words of curses that he had uttered just a couple of moments ago, he now directed at himself. Immediately, the thought occurred to him, "It's my fault in everything," which never left him again. "Sir, why are you torturing yourself like this? There will be another train tonight." "You'll make it to the capital," said the station worker, who approached the man kneeling in the middle of the station, in a gentle voice. Thomas looked at her with crazed eyes. He didn't say anything to her, just ran out onto the street. He hailed a taxi and went to the hospital. The doctor immediately reassured Thomas and said that there was a slight chance that his daughters could one day walk. They would not only walk but also run. The doctor was a friend of Mr. Thomas. They had participated in medical conferences several times, so he trusted his words. "But you'll have to do some running too, Thomas," the treating doctor told the girls. "I'll write you the addresses and phone numbers of the best neurologists. Perhaps psychiatrists too. From my side, I promise to do everything in the best possible way. But I hope you understand that all of this will cost a pretty penny." Thomas thanked his friend. At the clinic where he worked, news of the incident spread quickly because no matter how big the city, rumors spread fast, especially among people of the same profession. Nancy also learned about the tragedy, so she immediately offered to help. And the chief doctor of the clinic where Thomas worked decided to award him a bonus and also announced a fundraiser among the staff. Thomas's colleagues helped him out quite a bit, but it was all in vain. Claire and Ophelia never recovered. If it weren't for the help from his colleagues and Nancy's support, Mr. Thomas wouldn't have been able to cope with his pain. At first, he couldn't even sleep at home. Martha kept haunting him. His wife would come to him every time, reminding him of that terrible accident. She would repeat the same phrases from their last conversation. "We need to go to the clinic. We're going with the girls. Please, forgive me." "It's me who should be asking for your forgiveness," Thomas would say into the void. Nancy watched this state of affairs. Every time, she would sigh heavily and shake her head. Then she would go to the twins to set up their IVs or simply read them a story. She thought the girls were lucky. They were still young and couldn't fully comprehend what had happened to them. The twins didn't even remember the moment of the accident. They only came to in the hospital. The man spent about 40 minutes at the cemetery. He couldn't even look into his wife's eyes, not even in a photograph. He always felt like she was looking at him with condemnation. He saw those eyes every night in his dreams. Life always drained out of them. He heard Martha's and the girls' screams. There was no escaping that horrible feeling. He wished he could go back to that day and tell his wife to stay home. He would never have sent her to driving school, never bought a car, never let her get behind the wheel. And if only he could, he would have corrected everything. But now it was too late to think about that. Thomas realized that he couldn't go to work today. He wanted to drown his sorrow in something strong, to forget, to get drunk to the point where he wouldn't see any dreams. He wanted to break free from this captivity, even if just for one night. Mr. Thomas called the chief doctor of the clinic and asked for the day off. He didn't have any surgeries scheduled for today. And if something urgent came up, there was his partner. Mr. Matthews was an understanding person. He himself wanted to suggest to his surgeon to take a break from work today. So he responded to his request with agreement. Thomas went straight to the bar after the cemetery. He spent half a day there, then went home. What a horror! Nancy exclaimed when she saw Thomas struggling to even stand on his feet, struggling to even take off his shoes. The girl quickly helped him and led him to the bedroom so that the twins' teacher wouldn't notice the father of her students in such a state. Nancy made sure Thomas fell asleep, then escorted the teacher out. For the rest of the day, she took care of the girls, so they didn't notice their father either. Mr. Thomas slept until late evening. It was time to tuck Claire and Ophelia in. Nancy took care of that too. Why didn't Daddy come home? Claire asked. Did he leave us too, like Mommy? Ophelia added softly. No one abandoned you, Nancy reassured the girls. Your dad is already home. He just had a tough day. He's already asleep. And it's time for you to sleep too. After Claire and Ophelia fell asleep, Nancy went to the bedroom to Thomas. She sat across from him and watched him sleep like a maniac. There was nothing beautiful about it. But Nancy didn't want anything else at that moment. She cherished every moment with Thomas. Finally, the woman waited for the man to open his eyes. Forgive me, please, I completely lost control today, the man, who woke up at midnight, apologized. I'll pay you for all the hours you had to work overtime. No payment needed, Nancy replied gently and somewhat mysteriously, and sat down on the bed next to Thomas. These girls are like my own daughters to me. It wasn't difficult at all for me to look after them. The man thanked his helper once again and reached for the glass of water that Nancy had thoughtfully placed on the bedside table. She took care of not only the twins tonight, but also took care of the man, acting like a nanny. She made him broth, ran him a bath, and then, for some reason, poured him some brandy. Thomas didn't refuse the drink. He wanted to forget again. Since he was granted 2 days off from work, and Nancy decided to take care of the daughters, he could fully immerse himself in his grief. You were thinking about her again. Maybe it's time to let go of this and move on? Look around you. You have a good life, Nancy said, moving closer and closer to Thomas as if she were a purring cat. Where is it good? My daughters became disabled because of me. I'm alone, and I'll never be able to love someone as much as I loved Martha, Thomas replied, his voice trembling. I only go to work to distract myself a little. If it were up to me, I'd just drink myself into oblivion. You have no idea what it's like to fall asleep with the thought that you're responsible for someone's death, the death of the woman you loved, and wake up with the same realization. Nancy made a displeased face. She didn't like hearing about Martha. The truth was, she had been hopelessly in love with Mr. Thomas for over 7 years. She remembered her first day at the private clinic. When she saw him, she immediately knew she couldn't love anyone else. The news that Mr. Thomas was married didn't upset her. She intended to lure him away from his family, but soon she learned that his wife was pregnant. Nothing could stop the infatuated girl. She continued her attempts to seduce him. It's worth noting that all of them were unsuccessful. Mr. Thomas remained faithful to his wife. Not once in all these years did he respond to the nurse's flirtation. Several times he even reprimanded her and asked her to stop such behavior. Nancy also vividly remembered the day of the accident. As terrible as it may sound, she was even a little relieved when she learned that Martha had died. That's why Nancy offered her help. She hoped that this would bring her closer to the object of her affection. But the girl couldn't even imagine that Thomas loved his wife so much that even after Martha's death, she was still a rival to her. The man slightly lowered his resistance. He was immensely grateful to Nancy for helping with the girls. Thomas didn't notice any hints from the nurse and didn't understand that her offer was just another way to get closer. But Nancy began to act more delicately. She supported Thomas. At first, she didn't even try to hint that she planned to take Martha's place. And this time, she thought that Mr. Thomas was most vulnerable. He was still under the influence of alcohol. Moreover, he continued to drown his emotional pain in alcohol. And his soul was filled with gratitude for Nancy taking full care of the girls. The girl moved closer and closer to Thomas until her face was next to his. The man finally noticed that Nancy wasn't listening to his lamentations and fell silent. The nurse immediately kissed him. It's unclear what contributed to Nancy's plan coming to fruition. Whether it was Thomas's confusion, his intoxicated state, or his complete emotional emptiness. But at that moment, the girl got what she had been waiting for so long. Thomas woke up in the morning feeling incredibly thirsty. He opened his eyes and immediately noticed a glass of water and a headache pill on the bedside table. With trembling hands, the man reached for the glass. He briefly thought that he shouldn't have drunk so much yesterday. But it was too late to regret it now. As they say, you can't change the past. Nancy, you're amazing, the man said hoarsely. I spare nothing for my beloved, Nancy's voice suddenly sounded. A shiver ran down Mr. Thomas's spine. He slowly turned around and found the nurse in his bed. She had pulled the blanket up to her neck, but it was clear that she was completely naked underneath. Images from the previous night immediately flashed through Thomas's mind. His cheeks flushed instantly. He felt embarrassed. It wouldn't be accurate to say that the man hated himself at that moment, but he was overwhelmed by a very strange feeling. It seemed to him that he had betrayed his love for Martha, even though she hadn't been in this world for 2 years. In all that time, he had never betrayed his mourning for her. Until this moment. No matter how hard he tried to explain to himself why he had acted like this, he couldn't. Nancy, on the other hand, didn't feel any embarrassment. She smiled contentedly and leaned towards the man's lips. The woman felt confident, as if she were the mistress here. Let's discuss this right away, Thomas said too seriously, pulling away from the girl's kiss. You saw for yourself what state I was in yesterday. I'm very ashamed of my behavior. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Nancy interrupted him. The girl noticed that Thomas had started addressing her formally, using, although this hadn't been the case before. It only indicated that she was now hearing something completely unexpected. Nancy had woken up several hours ago. She deliberately got up early to tidy herself up and prepare breakfast for her beloved. And yet, he behaved as if nothing had ever happened between them. This isn't right, Thomas continued, paying no attention to Nancy, who was ready to burst into tears and run away. I know about your feelings, so I shouldn't have given you false hope. You'll receive double pay for yesterday's work. And if after what happened, you want to stop communicating with me, I'll understand. Although I'll say it again, there's no one in the world who has done more for me than you. Am I the kind of girl who would take payment for a night spent with a man? Nancy flared up. You understand what I meant, Thomas hurriedly tried to reassure her, only now realizing how offensive his offer sounded. I'll pay you for the time you spent with the girls. I don't need any payment. I did it from the heart, Nancy said through tears. As it always has been. The girl gathered herself and quickly ran out of Thomas's apartment. He mentally scolded himself. He shouldn't have acted like that. What happened last night would greatly spoil his relationship with Nancy. Of course, he understood that she had hoped it would mark the beginning of their relationship, but he wasn't ready for that. Thomas knew for sure that Nancy wouldn't be happy with him, as he loved another and seemed to never be able to forget her. Fortunately, Thomas had a day off today, so he could take care of the girls himself. The girls were very happy that their dad spent the whole day with them. "It looks like I'll have to find you a new nanny," Thomas said sadly to the girls at dinner. "That's fine," Claire unexpectedly replied. "I never liked Nancy anyway," Ophelia added. "I think she's nice," Ophelia unexpectedly disagreed with her sister. "We're used to her, and a new one will come. What will we know about her?" But Mr. Thomas didn't have to look for a new babysitter for the girls. It was 8 in the evening when the doorbell rang. Thomas wasn't expecting anyone, especially at such a late hour. Seeing Nancy at the door, he experienced a whole range of conflicting emotions. Joy, shame, relief, embarrassment. "I understand that you've rejected me again. But that doesn't mean I wanted to abandon the girls," Nancy said. There was pride and seriousness in her voice. Thomas liked that very much. He even felt inferior to her. He felt terribly embarrassed himself. "In the end, you won't be able to find another assistant who will also pick the right medicine, set up the feed, and bathe your girls." "Thank you," Thomas replied simply. Nancy silently entered the apartment and began to take off her shoes. Mr. Thomas was surprised and informed her that he didn't need her services today, as it was already evening. He had already done all the injections and other procedures necessary for Claire and Ophelia. "What are you talking about?" Nancy pretended to be surprised. "And did the girls take their vitamins?" Thomas shook his head. He didn't even know they needed to take any vitamins. Nancy had been taking care of almost all of the girls' treatment. Mr. Thomas himself had forgotten what medications the girls were prescribed. "There you go." Nancy handed Claire and Ophelia their daily dose of tablets and lectured them by wagging her finger. The girl simply gave Claire and Ophelia their pills for the day and headed for the exit. Before leaving, she added that she would come at 8 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, as always. Mr. Thomas breathed a sigh of relief. One headache less. He hoped Nancy understood him correctly and really wouldn't expect them to have a romance. He also worried that he had hurt her deeply. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful night. Nancy behaved as usual. Mr. Thomas also calmed down. Everything returned to how it was before. The only thing that remained unchanged were the nightmares that tormented the man every night. In the private clinic where Thomas worked, there usually weren't any extraordinary situations. After all, it was a decent institution with professional security. But one day, somehow, a girl managed to get into the clinic. She appeared to be around 12 years old and immediately caused a commotion in the hospital. Her cries for help echoed throughout the first floor. The poor girl fell to the floor and cried in pain. Immediately, a security guard rushed over and tried to lift her to escort her out. But as soon as he touched her, she screamed even louder. It was at that moment that Thomas returned from his lunch break. "Don't touch her. You don't know what's wrong with her," Thomas stopped the guard. "You might make things worse." "She won't get any help here," the man replied. "Look at her. This patient definitely can't afford treatment at our clinic. Just because she's a gypsy doesn't mean we should throw her out like unwanted junk," Mr. Thomas said sternly. The surgeon leaned down to the girl to question her, to find out what was causing her such severe pain and hysteria. The poor girl pointed to her stomach. Thomas immediately lifted her shirt. Without even examining her, he knew she had a hernia that required urgent surgery, and it had been there for quite some time. While Mr. Thomas was conducting the examination right in the foyer, the security guard called the clinic's chief doctor and informed him of what was happening. He replied that he would come down to them immediately. "Does this girl have a file in our hospital? Or is she prepared to pay for treatment?" Mr. Matthew asked sternly, tearing Mr. Thomas away from the examination. "Can't we make an exception?" Thomas immediately responded. "If she doesn't have money, should we just leave a person with such a problem? Let her go to a public hospital, they'll help her there." "We don't engage in charity here," Mr. Matthew replied sternly, then ordered the guard to escort the gypsy girl out. The girl no longer cried out, but her eyes were full of tears. She looked so pitifully at Thomas, his heart ached for her. He imagined that someday his daughters might need help, and they could be just as indifferently sent away simply because they didn't match up socially. "Don't touch her," Thomas ordered the guard harshly. "I'll escort her myself. You'll only make things worse." The guard shrugged and returned to his post. Mr. Thomas took the gypsy girl by the arm and led her to the exit. "Please," the girl begged. "Don't chase me away, it hurts so much. It feels like my stomach is going to burst from the inside." "Quiet, I'll help you, just be quiet for a bit," Thomas whispered. He pretended to lead the girl away, but in reality, he guided her to the emergency exit. Thomas quickly brought the gypsy girl to the operating room. The surgery was straightforward, so he didn't even need assistance. Plus, recovery after such an intervention is easy and quick. Thomas finished in less than an hour. While the gypsy girl was coming out of anesthesia, Mr. Thomas sat next to her, thinking about what to do next. Although the operation was simple, sending her out onto the street wasn't the best solution. He needed to find out if the girl had any relatives, somehow inform them of what had happened, and tell them to take her home. Moreover, all this needed to be arranged in such a way that no one would notice. "I still don't know. What's your name?" Thomas remembered when the gypsy girl came to herself. The girl replied that her name was Betty. She thanked the man several times for his help. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time they were filled with boundless gratitude and happiness. However, the next question made her sad again. Thomas asked how he could find her relatives. "I have no one. To be more precise, I don't know where my relatives are," Betty replied with a downcast voice. "I have a sister, but she doesn't want to hear about me. In fact, I've been living on the streets for several weeks. I ran away because my sister's husband was beating me." Now Thomas felt even sadder. He pitied the poor girl even more. He hadn't thought her fate was prosperous, but he hadn't imagined it was this bad. The man pondered. It was unacceptable to send her back out onto the street. He would never forgive himself for that. What tormented him even more was the thought that another person might perish because of him. Who knows what kind of danger could befall the girl while she was recovering from surgery on the street. After a couple of minutes, he had no doubt that Betty would come to live with him. "I'll take you in, but only until you recover from the operation," Thomas told Betty. "After that, try to reconcile with your sister. If necessary, I can help with that." Betty wanted to get up to hug her savior, but Thomas stopped her. He said she should conserve her strength and not move unnecessarily. "You'll stay here until the end of my shift, and in the evening, we'll go home," Thomas said and left the room. But Mr. Thomas couldn't finish his work that day. He worried that someone would enter the operating room and see Betty. Besides, he felt sorry for the girl. It was quite unpleasant to lie on the hard iron table for so long. "Can I leave early today?" Thomas asked Mr. Matthew. "You know I have a special relationship with you," the chief doctor began. "But you're starting to take advantage of my trust and love for you." "You could have just said no," Thomas said offendedly and was about to leave the room. "Wait," Mr. Matthew stopped him. "I didn't say I refuse your request. Of course, you can leave. I understand that your daughters are waiting for you at home. I meant the situation that happened during the day. We don't help those who can't pay the bills. This month, I'll deduct from your salary the amount that this gypsy girl was supposed to pay." Mr. Thomas first widened his eyes in surprise, wondering how the boss could find out that he had helped the girl after all, and then agreed that it would be fair. "What next?" Mr. Matthew asked in parting. "Will you fully pay for her treatment, or will you throw her out onto the street?" "I'll take her in," Thomas replied calmly. "Nancy will take care of her, and then we'll figure something out." Mr. Thomas carefully carried Betty to the car, laid her on the back seat, and drove home. He had never driven so calmly and slowly before. He was deeply worried that he might somehow harm Betty. He even carried her to the apartment. Nancy's face expressed a multitude of questions when she saw Thomas with the gypsy girl in his arms. But she didn't even have time to say anything. "She'll stay with me for a while," the man immediately said when he noticed Nancy's confusion. "There's no need to take care of her. Tomorrow, she'll be able to get up and take care of herself." Nancy shrugged and went home. Thomas went to his daughters to tell them about their new friend. Surprisingly, even Claire was happy about this news. The girls were glad to have a new acquaintance because they didn't have anyone else. Not a single friend. "Betty needs to rest today after the operation, and tomorrow I'll introduce you to her over breakfast," Thomas informed his daughters. "Maybe she can look after us instead of Nancy?" Ophelia asked. Mr. Thomas shot his daughter a questioning glance. If he expected any whims or discontent from Claire, he certainly didn't from Ophelia. She never contradicted him, except when she sided with her sister. "Yeah, you know, she got our teacher fired," Claire added. "Now that mean Mrs. Margaret will come back to us again." "What?" "Nancy has no right to fire teachers," the man exclaimed. "This school assigns a teacher who will conduct your lessons." "But Miss Laura herself told us she won't come anymore," Ophelia replied. Thomas promised to look into the situation. For the past month, the girls had had a new teacher. It was a young teacher, Miss Laura. She had been working at the school for 2 years, joining right after college. The girl was amazingly kind, and it was evident that she loved children. The girls significantly improved their academic performance when she started teaching them because they liked Miss Laura and found her explanations clear. On the other hand, the other teacher was old-fashioned, demanded a lot, and mainly left materials for self-study, claiming that homeschooling implied this format. Mr. Thomas also preferred the young teacher. He went to the kitchen to call Nancy and find out what had happened, why she had dismissed the teacher. There was a note on the table from Miss Laura, in which she informed them that she was indeed forced to stop classes and put the old teacher in her place. The girl didn't give a reason. "Nancy, does it include finding a teacher for the girls in your duties?" Mr. Thomas asked. "It seems you should be taking care of the twins' treatment." Nancy immediately noted that Mr. Thomas was again addressing her formally, which meant he was displeased with something. Indeed, this nurse contributed to the young teacher giving up her lessons. She was jealous of her beloved to Miss Laura. The girl was too attractive, and the girls admired her. Nancy was afraid that Thomas would fall in love with her. The nurse didn't even consider the fact that Thomas and the teacher hardly ever met. When the girls had their lessons, the man was at work. But what won't jealousy do to a woman in love? I wouldn't want to talk about the reason for her dismissal. "There's no need for you to be disappointed in people," Nancy replied mysteriously. She knew that Mr. Thomas would definitely demand explanations, so she decided to play with him and at the same time show her tact. "Nancy, right now I'm only disappointed in you," Thomas said persistently and quite sternly. "You've taken on too many responsibilities." Maybe it's time to drop the formalities with me? Nancy unexpectedly snapped. After everything that's happened between us, it's starting to sound foolish. I fired that teacher because I caught her stealing. I didn't want to portray the girl in a bad light, but you just didn't give me a chance to defend her honor. Mr. Thomas immediately changed his tone and apologized. He said he would never have thought ill of such a sweet girl. He thanked Nancy for her help. The man's last phrase made Nancy shudder with disgust. It's a good thing she decided to lie about Miss Laura. Otherwise, Thomas would have started considering her sweet. I think it's best not to inform the school about this incident, Nancy suggested. She's still young and foolish. Why ruin the girl's career? I agree. If she continues in the same vein, then the administration will find out on its own, Thomas agreed. The next morning was different from the previous ones. For the first time in 2 years, Thomas wasn't plagued by nightmares. Had his conscience finally eased because he helped the defenseless girl? It's unknown what caused it, but the man finally woke up in a good mood. Now he had to introduce his daughters to their new friend. Claire and Ophelia weren't at all bothered that a Romani girl would now be living with them. They hardly ever went outside, had no contact with society, so they didn't have any stereotypes about Betty's nationality. The girls became friends, even though the Romani girl was older than the twins. She happily played with them. Claire even taught Betty to read, which she did much worse than her new friends at her age. That's how Thomas learned that his ward hadn't even been going to school. The more the man delved into Betty's life story, the more horrified he became. Her parents beat her, so she ran away from home. But what was most terrifying was that nobody even looked for her. When the girl fled from her mother, she and her father were still shouting after her, telling her never to come back. Betty decided to seek shelter with her sister, but she was afraid to defy her husband, who was against having a guest. They themselves had 4 children. The sister's husband made Betty beg on the streets. Whatever Betty managed to collect, he took away. And then he began to beat the girl for wanting to live the life of a normal teenager. To go to school, play with friends. And then the Romani girl began to complain about constant pain. The sister's husband, and the sister herself, grew tired of these constant complaints and drove her away. Betty had been living with Thomas for 2 weeks now, and with each passing day, the man became more and more convinced that he couldn't drive her away. He was sure that it wasn't worth returning to his Romani sister. But he wasn't ready yet to leave the girl with him forever. Betty, on the other hand, was immensely grateful to the doctor for his help and shelter. She tried to be of some use. Cooked food, cleaned the house. Nancy tried to pay almost no attention to the Romani girl. She thought this guest wouldn't stay long. One day, Betty decided to dust the shelves where Claire and Ophelia's vitamins and pills were kept. The girls were tossing a ball out of boredom and watched their older friend work. Betty moved all the capsules from the shelf to the floor so they wouldn't interfere with cleaning. "Hey, Betty, catch!" Claire yelled and threw the ball to the girl. Betty jumped to the side to catch it and accidentally kicked one jar of vitamins with her foot. It rolled under the radiator, hit the wall, and the lid flew off from the impact. All the capsules spilled onto the floor. "What do we do now?" Betty asked, frightened. "Oh, come on, just pick them up and that's it," Ophelia reassured her. "Nancy is very careful with these pills," Betty replied. "I've seen her count them every time. Maybe they're very important." Claire laughed and said they were just ordinary vitamins, not worth worrying about. But Betty couldn't calm down. She saw how the nurse worried about them. The first thing she always did was open this jar. What if they're expensive? and some of the capsules broke open and spilled. Betty persisted. I'll buy new ones. I'll go and buy them right now. Betty quickly counted how many capsules were in the package, and then picked them up from the floor and discreetly threw them in the trash. She took the medicine jar with her to show at the pharmacy. Betty had a little money. Mr. Thomas himself gave her pocket money, and also for groceries. After all, the girl took on the responsibility of cooking. Betty worried a lot that she wouldn't have enough money for medicine. She was sure these vitamins were very expensive. But, to her surprise, it turned out not to be the case. The pharmacist said they were just ordinary cheap vitamin C. The jar cost Betty only 100 rubles. I don't understand, Betty said to the twins, turning the medicine in her hands. Why does she count them so carefully then? Maybe a certain amount is needed? Claire guessed. Why should we even think about what Nancy does? Ophelia laughed. She's a very strange lady anyway. Just put the right amount and forget about it. And that's exactly what Betty did. Finally, she was able to breathe a sigh of relief. Nobody even found out what happened. Nancy didn't even notice the substitution. But the sisters noticed that the taste of the tablets had changed. Don't you think these vitamins taste good, while the others were bitter and unpleasant? Claire asked her sister. Exactly. I thought I was imagining things. But since you noticed it too, it must be true, Ophelia's sister agreed. We should tell Betty to always buy our medicines. Maybe even the injections won't be so painful, Claire laughed. And Ophelia supported her. For a whole week, the girls took the vitamins Betty bought. But besides the taste, they differed in something else from the ones Nancy gave the twins. Claire was the first to notice. Her legs started itching, something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Then suddenly her finger twitched. She reached for the itchy spot. Ophelia, the girl shouted loudly. My finger is moving. Betty and Thomas heard the girl's cry, who was at home that day because it was his day off. The father and the Romani girl immediately ran into the twins' room. Thomas entered first. He almost fainted, but managed to pull himself together just in time. Hooray! Betty shouted loudly. The girl was happy because she saw Claire standing by her bed. Thomas ran up to the girl and lifted her up. He spun around with her and then hugged her tightly to his chest. Have you tried to stand up? Betty asked Ophelia. My leg didn't itch, the girl sadly replied. So what? The Romani girl laughed. Let's try. Betty reached out her hands to Ophelia. She gently took hold of them and tried to stand up. It was like a miracle, but even Ophelia was able to move her legs. She put her feet on the floor herself and then stood up. The girls' legs were weak, it was hard for them to stand for long. But it was already such progress. Thomas immediately took the girls to the clinic. There, the doctors were almost jumping for joy too. None of the medics believed anymore that the twins would one day be able to walk. Now no one doubted that these little girls would not only walk but also run. On Monday morning, Nancy, as usual, went to Thomas's house. The man was so happy for his daughters that he forgot to tell the nurse that he no longer needed her services. The twins were lying in the hospital. There they worked out on special simulators and learned to walk again. I'm sorry, I completely forgot to share the joy with you, Mr. Thomas said when he heard the front door opening. The man invited Nancy into the kitchen, put the kettle on. He sat down in front of her to tell her what had happened over the weekend. A smile never left his face. Betty also heard that the nurse had come. The girl didn't share the same joy as the man. The Romani girls suspected that the twins didn't just get up from their beds for no reason. Betty, like any Romani, was a great psychologist. She couldn't shake off the fact that Nancy treated cheap vitamins, which weren't even medicine, with inexplicable trepidation. The girl watched the nurse closely. She saw a shadow of doubt on her face when she opened the jar with the swapped capsules. Betty was also surprised that it was these vitamins that Nancy gave to the twins at the same time, even though the packaging said they should be taken with food. If she was so serious about their intake, why didn't she follow this condition? All of this raised suspicion for the Romani girl. Betty became especially tense at the moment when the girl stood up. That was when she switched the medicine. The Romani girl also sneaked into the kitchen and sat down at the table. "I also want to be present when you share our joyous news with Nancy," the cunning girl said. Thomas didn't object. He was so happy. Finally, he uttered what brought him such happiness. But Nancy's reaction was not at all what he expected. The woman smiled somewhat forcedly, as if she was forced to do so, and then slowly said, "What a happiness!" Betty didn't take her eyes off her face. Now she was sure something fishy was going on. She decided to make sure of that. "I'm so happy for them. I was so afraid they would get worse. After all, I swapped their vitamins. I was so worried about it," the Romani girl said, staring intently at Nancy. "What did you do?" Nancy almost hissed. "I was cleaning their room and spilled the vitamins, but I immediately bought the exact same package," Betty quickly justified herself, watching Nancy's every move. "How lucky that nothing bad happened because of this." "Nothing bad?" Nancy shouted, even standing up. "You have no idea what you've done." "Nancy, what's wrong?" The girls got up. "She didn't do anything wrong," Thomas said, surprised. "They were just ordinary ascorbic acid pills." "I don't think it could have affected their recovery," Betty added. The Romani girl was even a little scared of the woman's reaction. She was afraid Nancy would attack her now. Her gaze was so wild and angry. "Just ordinary ascorbic acid," Nancy repeated. She started to cry. "You have no idea," she began. Nancy grabbed her bag and rushed out of the entrance. Mr. Thomas immediately ran after her. He didn't understand what was happening at all. But Betty guessed. The girl suspected that the nurse intentionally fed the twins with some other drug so that their legs remained paralyzed. Thomas caught Nancy just outside the entrance. She began to struggle and tried to break free from his grip. The woman's face was covered in tears. Nancy lost her balance and fell on the asphalt. Thomas immediately sat down next to her. "Are you okay? What happened to you? Are you still in shock?" the man asked. "Do whatever you want with me, but I'll tell the truth," Nancy said, wiping away tears. The nurse hesitated for a long time to admit that she was the reason her lover's daughters had been bedridden and in a wheelchair for 2 years. Nancy only mentioned the name of the drug she had been feeding the sisters. And Thomas immediately guessed what was going on. "But why? Why did you do that?" Thomas asked after Nancy said which medicine she had been giving the girls. "I just wanted to be close to you," Nancy said quietly. "I wanted to be closer to you. I thought that soon you would suggest that I move in. And then a wedding wouldn't be far off." Thomas grabbed his head. He made a few small circles and stopped right next to Nancy, who was still sitting on the ground. "Where did you get the idea that I was going to propose to you?" he asked. From his voice, it was clear that he was struggling to contain his aggression. "Have I ever told you that I love you? Was there any hint from me that we could be together? Well, we were even intimate." I hoped that eventually you would give in, Nancy replied, barely breathing. At least I was with you every day. Mr. Thomas shouted loudly. He approached the entrance door and hit it with all his might. Some neighbors looked out of the window because of this noise. Now several pairs of eyes were watching Nancy and Thomas's conversation. The man broke his hands, but he didn't pay attention to the pain, just as Nancy didn't notice that her knees were scraped against the asphalt. She was crying, resting her head on her knees. Leave, Thomas said harshly but quietly. Just disappear so that I never see you again. But, Thomas, I love you, Nancy said, raising her head and reaching out to the man. Now your daughters will be able to walk, they will go to school, and I can become a wonderful mother to them and a wife to you. They hate you, and now I do too. I think I understand why, Mr. Thomas said. Do you really think I'll be with you after what you've done? If you don't leave right now, I'll file a report with the police. You've been poisoning 2 little girls for months. It's unknown what the consequences will be now. This medication isn't life-threatening. You know perfectly well, Nancy said quietly. Yes, it just paralyzes the legs. But otherwise, it's even beneficial. Right? Thomas yelled angrily. I'll say it one last time. Either you leave, or we go to the police station. Nancy struggled to get up. She didn't even bother to shake off the dirt. She lowered her head and slowly walked away, not knowing where to go. Thomas didn't bother to watch her go. He shouted to the neighbors, who were still standing in the windows and on the balconies, that the show was over and went home. As a parting shot, he slammed the door so hard that even Nancy flinched in fright. The woman walked down the street, moving her legs slowly and reluctantly. The grandmothers who watched the scene at the entrance sighed and gasped, watching the unhappy woman. They didn't know what she had done. Nancy hated herself. But most of all, she was torn apart by hatred for the Romani girl. She even wanted to go back to somehow get revenge on her. But the woman decided to stop in time. Nancy decided she had had enough. She didn't want to commit any more wrongdoings. She would now pay for her sins for the rest of her life. Betty immediately ran to Thomas with a bandage and iodine. She took his hand and led him to the sink. When the cold water touched the fresh wounds, the man winced in pain. His knuckles were severely swollen. The Romani girl quickly and carefully treated the wounds, and then bandaged his hand. Why did you let her go? I wouldn't forgive such an act, Betty asked as she wrapped the bandage around Thomas's hand. You have no idea what an infatuated woman is capable of, Mr. Thomas mysteriously replied. Nancy has been hopelessly in love with me for a long time. Maybe it was cruel of me to keep her so close to me. Let her go with peace. She didn't do it out of malice, just out of foolishness. You're a very good person, Betty concluded and tied a pretty bow on the man's hand. Thomas decided not to tell the twins what caused their disability. He also asked Betty to keep silent. The sisters returned home 3 weeks later. They could already move independently, but they remained homeschooled for the rest of the year. They started 2nd grade in school. Mr. Thomas couldn't drive Betty out onto the street or to her sister, who hated her. He became attached to the Romani girl. After what she had done, the man simply couldn't treat her like that. Thomas adopted the Romani girl, and it was no trouble at all. Betty's parents signed all the papers without a second thought. The poor girl was not wanted by anyone. Thomas hired tutors for Betty, and she went to school with her stepsisters. Nancy's worries about Mrs. Laura were not in vain. The twins ended up in her class, and Thomas finally couldn't resist asking why she had stopped coming to them. Of course, he no longer believed his nurse's words about the teacher stealing. The girl confessed that it was Nancy who drove her away. As an apology, Mr. Thomas invited the teacher to a cafe. She became Betty's tutor. The nightmares stopped tormenting the man. He finally came to terms with his wife's death and was able to let go of Martha. With this, his heart opened up to new feelings. Mr. Thomas fell in love with Mrs. Laura, and she reciprocated. Several years later, they got married. As for Nancy's fate, Mr. Thomas didn't know. He heard from colleagues that the nurse had moved somewhere to the village and was working at the local clinic. This information was enough for him. He was more concerned about his new responsibilities.